See you, my friend.
Absolutely. Good to see you too, Eric.
You're back. It's the only time I'm allowed to call them doctors in the first 30 seconds of the show.
Time number 5 and the first one in the new studio.
That's right. What do you think? Huh?
It's nice. A little more space.
A little more space.
Same amount of crap, but
well put.
New location. About the same distance from my house. So all told, I think it's fine. Yeah, it's about
same distance,
35, 40 minutes from my house.
It's interesting to have people on for the first time here that have been prior guests on shows, because they walk in and they go, "Oh, well, it looks like kind of like the same, but different."
It's the same
aesthetic
aura. It's just twice the foot space.
It is, yeah. It kind of is. I mean, and people said, "Well, I didn't think you'd put a couch in here." And I'm like, "Well, I needed something because it was like so much space."
Needed a place to sleep.
Oh yeah, I may if I don't quit buying stuff. Because my wife's going to kick me out, and I might end up sleeping there. It's entirely possible. So, a couple things, my friend. What the hell you been doing the past couple months? You did a little traveling too, right?
Not much. So last March, I went out to Austria to visit my brother. That was fun. Austria. Yeah, he was in Salzburg. So I went there for about 10 days. That was enjoyable. First international travel
since
I was
COVID?
able to do. Yeah, since December 2019.
Okay.
So it was nice to get out and move around, explore that part of life again. Yeah. And then just this summer, we're going to head down to the beach this week. But I've pretty much just been in the office getting work done. It's been nice, with childcare and having little ones over the last couple of years. It's been a challenge, to try and string anything together. But I think in the last couple of months have been as at least consistent productivity on the research end as I've had in the last couple of years, which is a good feeling to get that going again.
In your world, in your world of academia, are we back to normal? Are we back to the before times?
So the last half-ish of the semester in the spring was mask-free. Students are obviously welcome to wear them if they want, and several did, and that's fine. I would hope we are. That's kind of the lingering question moving forward towards the fall. I think it's pretty clear over the last couple of years that people want to be in person and want to be interacting the way that it was.
Sure.
Masks are a burden, to wear, not saying on net yay or nay, but, still costly at the end of the day. I think it wears on everyone. I don't think it's consciously, but I think after a while you just feel worn down in an environment like that, because at least in my classroom, it's so much of it's the back and forth, and so much of it is the interaction and the challenging of the students and the challenging of the professor by the students, and building knowledge right there in real time. And I think masks just they're a hamper to that, they're a hurdle to that. And so I hope we're back to where we were in terms of just how classes run in the fall. It was great lecturing to students at the end of the spring semester, and just getting a glimpse of the way we'd remembered it had been the 2 years, more than 2 years prior. So it's nice.
Do you think there's anything to the idea that students lost something? They lost a year, or do you think it's more specific to the individual student? When you think of 2020 in general, right?
I myself think of more like the 2020-2021 school year,
correct.
that academic year,
like the fall of 2020 and the spring of 21,
right? Where myself personally, I did nothing but online classes, and I didn't think that was going to be a good substitute for me delivering this content in person. It wasn't. It was kind of a make best, make do with what you have where you are kind of situation. I hope this isn't the case, but I do feel like there was kind of, at least maybe like the freshman class that year didn't really get like their first college year, and seeing the performance of the students in my class at the principal's level classes who are sophomores that would have been freshmen that year. Right. It was the worst of my 13 years. I'm hoping that was just a one-off. That's horribly unlucky and unfortunate for that class if they are, kind of permanently on their back foot their whole way through their college experience, because they just didn't get that good first kind of go. They're always kind of a few steps behind. I hope that's not the case moving forward. Hopefully, the machine gets up and rolling again.
Probably the hardest for the freshmen, right? Because they come in.
I would think so, because college is, for many of them, a big change from high school in terms of necessity of studying hours need to be put in. You kind of need to trial by fire in some of those early classes. And I don't teach freshmen. Rarely do I teach. Rarely do I have a freshman in my class. I don't teach like classes of freshmen. But the people that do, I do a fine job of preparing them for what I need out of them as sophomores.
Got it.
And I would suspect that they similarly kind of had their hands tied at the sophomore level. What made me actually really happy in this last year was doing sports econ last spring. Those are upper division kids. And so they would have had, let's see, I guess normal, broadly speaking, normal freshman, normal most of sophomore, weird junior, and then maybe back to approaching some semblance of normal senior year, maybe. I think I'm getting the years right. And that sports econ group was one of the strongest I had. So maybe it's the case that, we had that hiccup and it was what it was. And hopefully moving forward, we're back to producing great students. Not that they're bad. It's just that we're back to executing as we could execute as a university and as a college.
Okay. What about you? Does it feel more normal now? Do you start, I guess I'm always interested in people's perception based on their vocation, the before and the after. Are we kind of getting, I asked musicians recently, Matt, and they're telling me the same thing consistently, that it's great to be playing live. It's good to see people. It's good to interact with the musicians in their band or on their ensemble again. It's great. But they look out and they see their clients, which are their customers, their fans, and they're of the belief that, they don't feel like we're quite there yet.
Sure.
Now, you see these big concerts where there's thousands of people, and it sure looks from afar that we are.
Right.
But the artist is telling me in here, not yet.
Yeah, I sure could tell you, at least for me personally and any students that I talked to, boy, they were happy to come back and see everyone's faces and be in class, and that was something they really, really liked. Is there a little,
trepidation or something? Or
for lack of a better term, like PTSD that's still there with the just everything that's been thrown at them for the last couple of years, whether it's the university and safety policies, and again, not denigrating that or saying it was wrong or anything. It was what it was, and that can't be changed. To what they hear, in the media about, constant reports of cases or this or that. It's just a day after day after day, and it's
now
just
we have monkeypox,
right? And these are late stage teenagers, 20, 21-year-old kids that now, in light of everything that's been going on the last couple of years, are they going to feel guilty going out with their friends, which is what all people that age, that's part of becoming older, is that's what you do at that age. Most people, that's
part
what
of the college experience too.
It is, right? And it's unique for every student. I'm not saying every student's going to the South Side and doing that whole thing every night, but it's getting together, and whether it's a fraternity function or whether it's a club activity or it's student government, whatever, all those things, they were all just like axed, just like no more in person. And that's a large portion of what constitutes, evolving over 4 years or 5 years at a university and becoming who you are. And so it's just, I don't know, I always tried to, give them as much leeway as possible with this. This is hard for them too. This is hard for them. And I do hope for their sake as a collective that it's back to as much as normal as it can be in the fall. If not 100, then can we get 95 of the way there,
right on,
with just people's experience being like, this is how college should be.
What about those kids that were, let's say, during the fall 20 and the spring 21 year, that is the school year?
Yes.
What about those kids that were seniors? Like that's how they kind of went out.
I know.
Yeah, that's a really strange. Now you've lost them.
Yes.
How does that work?
Yeah, so they would have had a normal freshman and sophomore year. Again, the normal student, if you will.
Right. They
would have had the end of their junior year lopped off. And then their entire senior year would have been either virtual or what Duquesne. So I did mine completely virtually, live. Synchronous is what they call it.
Synchronous.
So like live. Whereas virtual asynchronous would be like I record my lectures and you could watch them whenever you want.
Yeah, I got a problem with that.
It's some people did that, and that's fine. But then Duquesne also had this thing. I know we've talked about this on previous shows. Was called High Flex.
Yeah.
Which different by particular classroom, but generally speaking, about 40% of the class shows up in person, distanced around the classroom, and then the remaining portion of the class attends via Zoom.
And that happened in the spring of 21?
That happened
Fall 20?
Fall 20, spring 21.
Oh, they have it in fall 20?
Oh yeah, that was their big thing that they wanted to push in fall 20 because
cool. I didn't know that.
well, they did a survey. So March 2020, we shut it down.
Right.
The semester ends up. Everyone limps to the finish because no one's prepared to do live courses online. It's just you're doing whatever you can to get through. And so they surveyed the students after the spring 2020 semester, and they're like, "Well, what do you think of the classes that went to online? What do you want, etc." And the students, not surprisingly, said, "We want classes in person.
Sure,
we want them in person." And so the university was real big on saying, high flex students want in person. We're doing high flex. We're doing high flex. We're doing high flex. And high flex wasn't. The students I talked to, just trying to interview them or get a sense for the lay of the land. How's the high flex going? They said people aren't really showing up. They know if they can get it on Zoom, they don't need to show up in person.
Interesting.
Yeah, they said it's not going great. I know some professors that taught in it weren't a huge fan of it. I had a sense that all at one time, managing students in a classroom while staying in one place because you can't move around the classroom, and I'm all over the place when I lecture, talking into a camera, making sure the microphone works, making sure the camera's pointed at the whiteboard, dealing with questions from Zoom. It's just a lot to juggle at once. I mean, having X amount of students in a classroom, your goal is always to try and, get the train moving and get the elephant up the hill and get the momentum going in class. And
sure.
I kind of took a step back and I'm like, that's just a lot to juggle. That's just a lot. So I did mine all online. It was a unique experience. Bought an iPad, had the iPad join into the Zoom, and the iPad's the whiteboard.
Right,
so students could ask questions in real time. Making the best, we always, maximize subject to constraints is always what we say in economics. And those were the constraints, and that's, I think, the best. I never thought of my responsibility of delivering a live course in person in the classroom. I always view my responsibility as deliver the best course you can to these students, deliver the best version of what you could do given what's in front of you. And normally that's in person. I don't do PowerPoint. Everything generated live, models derived live.
No PowerPoint.
Not unless I need to do, I don't even really do PowerPoint. Usually when I teach macroeconomics in the spring, you cover a wide range of, the inflation and unemployment and economic growth, like all the kind of big country level stuff. Only thing I ever pulled the screen on for that is just there's this data set out there. It's called FRED. I think it's Federal Reserve Economic Data is what it's called for. I think it's out of the St. Louis Fed, and they've got like tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of like data series. So you could pull up like, GDP growth, annual GDP growth in the United States since, 1950 or something like that. It's great just to get that visual up on the board when you're talking about it. Because one nice thing about macro that I like to say, because I'm not a huge macro fan, I like doing micro stuff a lot more, and my research is all micro. One nice thing about macro that I think students can take away from it is they get a sense for, the best way I could say it is like what the numbers should be. So like, let's say, and this has been a remarkable couple of years to teach macroeconomics.
I can imagine.
Before that, if you read in the newspaper or online, inflation in the United States is projected next year to be 5.5%.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's that mean? Like, is that a lot? Is that not that much? Like, I hope
frame of reference.
Exactly, a frame of reference. And so I would hope that leaving the course, if they go moving forward, and let's say we're having this conversation in 2019, wow, 5.5%. Usually we're around like 2-ish. Like, wow, that's for us, that's pretty decent. But there's some countries that have it worse. So like at least that frame of reference and the context for it. Now it's like, you put up the inflation on the board last semester, and it's like you're seeing something I really haven't even seen in my lifetime either. I mean, like, this is historically high. Just want to impress upon that.
I thought as a kid in like 79, 80, I think I saw something similar to that. Was
right.
Was that about right historically?
In the mid 70s, yeah. Volcker comes in and, takes the hardline effort to try and beat down inflation. I remember, so my parents bought their home in San Francisco in, I think it was 1972.
Okay.
And they remember, interest rates on homes being like double digits, and I mean, how you're a realtor,
I wasn't a realtor back then. I'm not that old, buddy.
I mean, how would you, what are mortgage rates at now? I don't know. Like ballpark, what are we looking at?
Like 5.
5? Because I feel like when I think ours is like a little less than 4.
Yeah.
But we've got inflation's high. I mean, are you seeing mortgage rates like tick up?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, but the rapid fluctuations is something I haven't seen. Just like the scope of the fluctuations rapidly and quickly, and the volume of it. It's that's been I mean, I'm not in that game day in, day out. I mean,
Sure.
I trust my client and their lender. I mean, I think realtors make a mistake sometimes, Matt, and going off on a tangent, but I believe that we make a mistake when we try to wear too many hats, especially when we're not legally able to.
Sure.
We pretend to do that.
Yeah.
Realtors want to know everything.
Sure.
I stay in my lane.
These are still, I mean, 15 or even 30-year
Right.
mortgages. And so
Correct.
they try to project inflation across, so I mean, it's a fair way of saying like, all right, it's high now, but we maybe have some belief that the Fed's going to attack this in 18, 24 months from now. It may be back to a
And in the
level.
end, Americans also like that concept of refi. So in theory, you're saying, okay, yeah, I'll pay a little bit of, I may pay a higher rate now, but the hope is it's going to drop back into the twos again.
and it makes sense.
And I'll
to-
have some closing costs to pay, but I'll lock
Right.
something in then. And I think that's a maneuver. It's not an illegitimate maneuver, but again, it's an element of risk
Sure.
involved with that.
Right,
but,
right.
But yeah, double digit. I was worried about that. I mean, I'm still worried that maybe, depending on what happens the next couple of months, we might be up around 9, 10.
I think it's last month was 9.1. I think. Don't quote me on that. It's somewhere up around 9, and yeah, I think you could hit. I think double digits is out there.
This
unfortunately.
generation's never seen inflation.
Never. I mean, I was born in 1979.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly any working memory I have is not inflation like this.
Yeah.
Last time I was around here was the mid 70s.
We would hear, for those who had an interest in economics at all, even a casual interest, you would hear other countries, oftentimes, unfortunately, third world countries, they would see what's they call rapid inflation. There's a term for that.
Hyperinflation.
Hyperinflation.
Yeah.
You hear like these ridiculous things, 300% annually. Like we can't wrap we can't wrap our minds around that.
I mean, it's the best you could say for things like that. When it gets to be hyperinflation, understandably, it gets hard to measure because things are changing just so quickly, and usually there's a lot of black market transactions there too. So it's kind of hard to officially measure where inflation does have some shortcomings just as a measure, even when you're measuring it in the United States. But measuring inflation at 3, 4, 5%, even 9%, like I'm pretty confident 9% is pretty close to what inflation is actually going to be. When you have something like, like Zimbabwe, they're the notes I always show in class of the $100 trillion bills. I don't even know what the annual inflation, but it'd be something like 1 to the, 10 trillion, whatever it is. So it's 1 to the 10 to the 16th.
It's almost nonsensical.
Right. Basically, a workable way of that I try and tell my students is like, this isn't going to be exactly accurate, but this is the way you need to think about it is imagine price is doubling every day. Like that's getting you in the realm of hyperinflation and what's going on. And so Zimbabwe was there, Venezuela most recently, historically Germany in the 30s, had a bunch.
Right.
Hungary right after World War II had a bunch. I mean, there's these instances that people know of hyperinflation, and I tell the students in class, I'm like, look, like it doubles a day, and that may not even really be hitting you, but let's go through that. Your Happy Meal's $5 on Monday, it's $10 on Tuesday, it's $20 on Wednesday, 40 on Thursday, 80 on Friday. Like that's what you're talking about.
That's
is that level,
insane.
right? And so that's always a good place to talk about. And talk about this idea of the velocity of money. How quick does money circulate throughout an economy? And so I always try and get students to put themselves into the models, but it's so hard to put yourself into a hyperinflation situation because they just, I've never been in one.
Right.
It's just so hard to their whole lives have been 3% inflation. How on earth can they imagine something that's just foreign? Right. And so it's things like, think about your last job and how often did you get paid at your last job? And I'm like, I get paid every other week. A lot of people get paid every other week. Some people get paid once a month. Some people get paid weekly. Is that a contributing factor for you where you take the job? And they're like, no, I mean, I'll get paid. Yeah, you'll get paid. No, I agree. It's not really a contributing factor. Now stick yourself in Zimbabwe. How often do you want to get paid? You control them a little bit, but daily. How about twice a day? My God, things are going, you go out to lunch, you come back, prices are higher. So it's just hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is obviously wrecks economies because there's just no monetary foundational basis anymore. What ends up happening is in Zimbabwe, the money becomes so worthless the currency becomes so worthless that no one ends up using it. And since it's not commonly accepted, believe it or not, that currency actually isn't defined as money. It's actually not money.
It becomes worthless, right?
Right. And so no one accepts it. And when it's not commonly accepted, you actually don't have money anymore. It's actually not money. It's currency, but it's not money because it's not being accepted. And so what happens is you just end up with American dollars over there as being the default currency until things shake out. It might still well be. I mean, I know Zimbabwe now is not in the midst of what it had been recently, but I'm not sure it's exactly leading the world in like fiscal austerity.
Probably not. What do you think is one of, if I don't know, you determine the scope of it, one of the most misunderstood factors of basic economics by Americans, whether it's we choose not to pay attention or understand it, or we willfully go ignorant toward it, or we just listen to the talking heads. What do you think is that misunderstood concept about our economics in this country?
I think if I had to pick something right now, and if you asked me tomorrow, I'd probably say something different. But if I had to pick something right now, it would be kind of, and I think these go hand in hand, it would be kind of the misunderstanding of where value comes from, and kind of the misunderstanding of where profit comes from. They're kind of related. Okay. And just the way that you see people want to go after and support widely these policies of like, we need to tax wealthy people and redistribute it to others. This idea that there's kind of this fixed pie out there to be had and that needs to be more equitably distributed amongst individuals, and that it can be simply done by just taxing and then going and giving money to someone else. And, you know, it kind of, people view profit as evil or taken from other people when, you know, profit is the value you created less the cost it took you to create that value. You know, that's, you know, I have a colleague, you've spoken to Anthony Davies, and he has so many great one-liners of just like ways of looking at things that these, I mean, it's the smartest people in the world like him that are able to like say things that are like so easily understood. Mm-hmm. So many, I'm sure I've complained about this before. There's so many papers in economics that you read and you're done and you're like, wow, I'm more confused than when I started. Like that's.
So you get that too? I don't feel so bad now.
No, it's like you just, some of this stuff. I remember a story from grad school where when you're in like a PhD program, it's not uncommon for job market applicants to come and give like the Friday research lecture. Usually like in the fall, you have different economists come in, friends of friends that come in, you know, and give research talks for like 60 minutes, 90 minutes on a Friday afternoon. And then everyone goes out to the brew pub afterwards and chats and just has a good time. And that's kind of like what we did at West Virginia. And that's not uncommon to West Virginia. That happens at a lot of places. And I remember going to a job market talk. So those would be in the spring, because all the interviews mainly take place like right after New Year's in economics. And then like the job market kind of extends February, March, April. That's just kind of the calendar for how you get jobs in economics.
Okay.
And so it would have been in the springtime, and a candidate came out from wherever it was. Don't remember the candidate. Don't even remember the professors I'm going to talk about, to be honest with you. I just remember being in the hallway hearing this. And one professor turns to the other after the talk and says, I don't think I understood one word of that. It must have been really good. And I'm like, that's not, I don't think that's it. I think you want, we're teachers at the end of the day. I think you want people to learn. So
certainly,
anyway, so this Anthony Davies quote, which I'm going to forget about here. He would say, oh yeah, it's some, don't speak about it as like, you know, Jeff Bezos has $80 billion in profits. Think of it as like he's created, you know, $80 billion in value over. And
certainly.
I think if people
it's taught wrong.
Right. And so, you know, I think if people could understand value and what profit signifies and how profit is earned and the role of profit, you know, as of right now, if I had to pick one, I think I would pick that as the top one.
So let's talk about, let's unpack that a little bit. So naturally, my response is going to be, well, it's being misconstrued for the masses by politicians, corporations. I mean, who does who feeds that out? Is it easier to take that stance, intellectually easier to take the stance that it's evil?
This isn't a downside of economics. This is just the battle that we have to face. And this is coming back to this show, why I love doing and pretty much only do long form stuff anymore, is because everything else is sound bites.
We're glad you're here, buddy.
Yeah, I love it. And I did long form stuff earlier in my career with Ron Morris, who's since passed away, but he had a radio show that would do like 25-minute segments at a go, and we just kind of like do them back to back. And I love the long form stuff because in economics, I feel like what we're battling is the short answers that are wrong, that sound really good, need to be countered with answers that are longer. And that doesn't lend itself well to sound bites, which is why I love so much when people like Anthony Davies come up with these like quick one-liners that you could like
Cuts
it's like
through.
add it to the arsenal, right? And I always, tell students in class that too. It's like, well, if, talk about this stuff with your friends, and by the way, here are some common, like, here's what they're going to come back at you with. And then here are the one-liners that you give back to them in that situation. So it's always trying to educate, but realizing that we live in a soundbite society. Tweets are what, 140
100%.
characters. Like, it's just
The world's running by that.
yeah.
That's
So
scary.
I think the burden is on us to come up with these, not attacks, not even bullets. I'm like talking about these arguments back, these quick, arrows that we could pull out quick and we can move back with and say, no, like here's the way you want to think about it. And here's a quick way to do that. And I always love coming across things like that. And Andy Davis is really, really good at doing those.
I just know that we've got a problem in society in regards to envy, which, that's a whole different topic.
Sure.
But part of that is we're lusting after perceived circumstances of other people, and it often goes back to money.
Right. And then I guess when you were mentioning that, it's also this idea of envy, but it's based in like, not only do I envy what you have, but you got it in a foul manner, and
Where does that come from?
a misunderstanding of profit. At the end of the day, it's just like, wow,
or
you
capitalism in
you have a
general?
lot of money, therefore you must have like that. Some of that should be mine, but you got
Right.
it, and
Right.
so it's like envy with something else that I'm blanking on the word on right now, but like suspicion or anger or like how dare you kind of a thing, like how that can't possibly all be yours.
So
kind of
is that a misunderstanding of capitalism?
Yeah, I mean, you could frame it like that. I mean, it's a misunderstanding of how profit is generated and how markets work and who is rewarded in the market system and of voluntary trade. I mean, that's all kind of describing capitalism in its purest form, if you want to talk about it like that. And then also the idea too, and I don't think it's unrelated to what we've just talked about, the idea that the government is to play a prominent role in the generation of incomes or the generation of insert blank here. This idea that government needs to play an active and prominent role.
Isn't that the problem?
Absolutely, it is. Right? It is never a problem in this country over the last however many years you want to talk about it of the government doing too little. It is not in the least. And there's regulation is. It's funny when you read papers. I guess ironically funny when you read papers that try to quantify like regulation. That's like tough to do.
Justify it?
Not justify it. Try to like put a number to it. So like if you're going to put like unemployment into your model, that's you just take the rate and off you go. Like unemployment, I bring this up in class too. Like unemployment, like that just kind of lends itself to being a number. What it's capturing may not be capturing fully what you think unemployment is, but at the end of the day, unemployment is like count the labor market or count the labor force, count those that have a job, count that are looking, like that's how you come up with it. It lends itself very much to being a number. So is inflation. Again, it might not be exactly right, but that's the kind of thing that seem like numbers should go to. Same with GDP. Like we're counting stuff. It seems like a number. Now if I go, let's look at the 50 United States. On a scale of 1 to 10, how burdensome is Pennsylvania's regulatory system? That's like not really, that's not the same kind of question, right?
No.
Like 5, like what's that mean? Like what's that even mean? So it's funny to read papers to see how they try to quantify that, and what they do sometimes is they actually count like the number of words of regulation. It's not perfect, but it's creative.
Okay.
I mean, that's one.
Is it relevant?
Yeah, I mean, it can be. I mean, is that going to be a perfect proxy for regulatory burden? No, it's not. Is it that inconceivable that more highly regulated states have more lines of law on their books? That seems halfway. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's not unreasonable, So it's just interesting to see how people try and look at that, and trying to assess the impact of the government on the economy runs into a lot of issues of how do we get a really good number to this, or how do we get a number that's really going to try and capture best what the government's doing and what impact it has on our output.
Yeah, it's really interesting how a good swath of the public over the last couple of decades in my lifetime has become okay with the concept of the government dealing money.
I know.
Directly to the public. It's fascinating to me.
I mean, that's, a couple years ago, that's what we started seeing. The government's now starting to cut checks. I got checks. I've got a couple kids. Like, I got checks on their behalf, and just because I was who I was, that's really in that shape and form, that's really the first time that it happened. I realize there's child tax credits and stuff like that. That's not, I mean, those have been around. But in terms of just like, we're going to pass something that says, what was it, $1,500 per person? Something like, I don't know, some amount of money.
And then another one.
Right. And then I think there's a third one after that, I believe. So, yeah, it's something. It's a lot of proponents of like I think I call it universal basic income.
Let's talk about that for a second. So what is that? Because that's getting floated around a lot.
Yeah. The idea that the government's basically not going to spontaneously decide to send out checks, that they're going to just go and actually send checks to people just for being people. So every single person
getting paid to breathe.
Yeah, every single person in Pittsburgh gets $1,000 a month, $500 a month. Well, whatever, obviously whatever it's going to be, but that would be, or every person, if that would be city level, obviously, if it's state level, if it's federal level, gets X amount. If you have, 2 dependents, then it's triple that, or they adjust it or whatever it is.
So I'm sure you've heard people who are proponents of this probably speak. What is their justification for that? Where is their belief founded in?
I think their belief would be founded in this idea of a vicious cycle that's going to exist. And so like poverty is going to beget more poverty, and these people just can't get out of this vicious cycle. And so if we can help them by virtue of cash payments, it may help them kind of get the momentum going on their side, and that things would kind of accelerate from there. That's the best argument that I think I've run across for that. Other arguments that I've heard have been, everyone should have at least this much money a month. That's more of a philosophical argument. That's not an economic argument, but they're just, everyone should have at least this much a month. It's not right that someone would ever have less than this. So everyone should have this much.
It's so arbitrary though.
I mean, I have to set the level somewhere. I mean, I understand that, whether it's 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 or whatever it is. I mean, you do have to set the level somewhere. And the people that have tried to think it through or justify it, the best argument you could make is we could try that. And if you're going to do that in a fiscally somewhat responsible manner, then
how's that look?
Well, then you'd need to basically slash like all the other welfare programs to pay for it. So like, look, we've got this whole welfare system thing that's set up that aims to do a lot of things. Maybe it doesn't do it terribly well, but there's money being spent on unemployment insurance. There's money being spent on Medicaid. There's all of that stuff that goes along with the lower end of the income scale. Drop those programs and replace it with this idea of universal basic income, which if someone's coming at it from that angle, at least they're realizing there exist budget constraints and we can't just print and give out money. At least they realize that, which, like, in light of the current level of economic knowledge, at least they're saying that. I don't necessarily agree with it, but at least they realize there's trade-offs here. Not just like, yeah, just add 1,000 a person to the existing, head count and off we go. It'll work out. Like, at least it's, okay, we're going to have to cut some stuff to do that.
I think the average citizen now hears these numbers. I think I might have said this in a prior show, like when I was a child, when you heard something on the news, like CBS News in, let's say, the early 80s, Dan Rather says something like this. Well, the U.S. government's appropriate defense spending for 1984 is $200 million. That $200 million was unfathomable amount of money.
Oh, yeah.
It's just it's like nothing.
I know.
It's all funny money.
These packages that have been passed, the recent ones over the last couple presidents related to this COVID stuff, I mean, they're like 1.1 trillion, 800 billion, 1.4 trillion. I mean, they're just like...
Me included, but the average citizen cannot get their mind around what a trillion of anything looks like.
There's many great visuals for this, but there's a great visual where it's like a cube is 1 million, and then they extrapolate out to that one little red cube being part of 1,000 bigger ones, so that would represent 1 billion, and that one's part of 1,000, right? 1 million is 1/1,000,000th of a trillion. Man. Visuals like that help, because we mentioned this a lot in class too. It's like, you're going to run across people in your life that you're going to be able to give numbers to them and they could just kind of understand that. I'm wired like that. For better or worse, like numbers, I've always just been a numbers person, and that's fine.
Absolutely.
But not everyone's like that, and that's fine too. Like, that's totally fine.
Understood.
So it helps to have a lot of different ways of like saying things. So like saying, 1 million is 1/1,000,000th of a trillion. That might hit some people one way.
100%.
Showing the cubes
100%.
You just like take a step back and you're like, wow, that's that's
sure.
another way. So I always like to have lots of different ways to try and say things.
I get that.
But no, it's hard to wrap your head around that much money. It's hard to wrap your head around that much money. It's just
how much of society just dismisses it though, like because it just goes in one ear and out the other. The numbers don't hold any weight because we're so conditioned. It's just all funny money, and we don't see an immediate impact outside of maybe the last year. We've never really seen an immediate impact to my life. If someone says, "Oh, they're going to spend an extra $100 million on the defense this year," okay,
right. And my sense recently for people that aren't struck by this is this idea of, be it the federal deficit or the next stimulus package or the GDP of the United States, whenever I'm told these numbers, it's always in trillions. And so that's just the level that these things operate at, is trillions. Like,
used to be billions.
Right. Well, they don't even go that far.
And it was millions.
They don't even go that far. They're just like, yeah, it's just, it's in trillions. That's just like the size of the game that we're playing here. And so therefore we must have policies that are in trillions, because otherwise it's a drop in the bucket. I'm not justifying it with that, but I think that's what people, it's just, that's
what's
what it is.
the next number?
Quadrillion?
I mean, that's so far off.
I wonder.
That's not possible, right?
Well, we could look back and see, because that would be the same thing as saying, obviously apples to oranges a little bit here, but when was the size of the game of government and economics ever like in the $1 billion range for like a federal budget, and maybe the economy, this would be easy to look up, the economy was like $20 billion, because trillion would look as silly then as quadrillion would look now, and I'm just curious how long it took to get there.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I should have that knowledge more readily available, but
that's okay.
Again, you don't tell me topics ahead of time. So.
No, sir. No, but I get it. It is for the citizen. It's the frame of reference for sure. But it's mind numbing. And again, I just think people look at it as monopoly money.
Yeah.
Which is so really messed up.
It is. No, it is. And I mean, I'm sure that contributes part of it, because, I remember I was president of my class when I was in college. And so we had a budget to spend collectively. The student government had a budget to spend collectively of, I don't know, what, $100,000 maybe, something like that. I can't remember. And this is before I was really any sort of, took any public choice classes. This was an undergrad. And it's just amazing, people respond to incentives big time, and when these elections took place, it was like spring break to spring break. So I was president for like the very end of my sophomore year and then like most of my junior year. And, when it turns over, the budget turns over too. So it's like you get down to those final months, you're like, yeah, spend this shit, man. Like we got to go out, we got to spend that. So, people are, I think, very hyper. You do have to spend it.
I know, but I'm thinking about government now, because
but people are very hypersensitive and hyper in tune to their budget. Most people are pretty hypersensitive to what's going on and responding to incentives and saving, and like most people, broadly speaking, I think can get by on that stuff and not just go nuts. But when it comes to stuff that's not yours, it's just like go. And, the government's not theirs. So they don't really have this, they don't have this feeling, sense of like they're wasting all this money. It's just,
because it's not their money to waste.
Right. I mean, yeah, most of it isn't. Yeah, that's my sense on that one. Is it seems it's just so far away from like spending $10 on a meal. Like you go and spend $10 on a meal, and then you open up your webpage and see there's a $4.4 trillion like federal budget. It's just like, it's not the same universe, and I think people have a hard time getting their head around that. I have a hard time getting my head around that, and I think about it a lot.
Yeah. I think also we talked a little bit about the public having interesting ideas on what capitalism actually is. They also have interesting ideas or misunderstandings of what actual socialism is, because that word gets bandied about not by the bulk of society, but there's elements in society that actually are socialist proponents. There's even a senator, I think, he claims to be a socialist, in philosophically anyways. So and going both ways, both socialist and capitalist. These are words that are bandied about as insults to the other side. So it's not like they want to get it right. They just want whatever baggage comes along. When did the word capitalist become an insult in America?
I mean, that I don't know, but
It has.
You know, absolutely it has. They'll say, look at Elon Musk, greedy capitalist. You know, that's used in a pejorative manner. It is. It's unfortunate, but it is. You know, and so then these words get, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, you know, those words, you're using them in a way I don't think you know what it actually means. Now they're just insults, you know.
And they're picking that up from their side or whatever.
Yeah,
but
of course.
Yeah, but to understand what socialism is, I mean, socialism has devastated, factually, I know this to be true, socialism has devastated populations of countries on the earth for centuries.
For at least over a century.
Over a century, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely it has. Or at least the idea of collectivization and
right.
and you know, group ownership of the means of production.
I don't think it's ever been proven to actually work.
That's a very popular line that people would like to say, like, well, we need to really try the pure socialist experiment. Because what the funny throwaway line is, well, that wasn't real socialism, right? Well, it didn't work because it wasn't real socialism.
Well, how do they define, roughly speaking, real socialism?
I mean, if you want to go back to, you know, the Karl Marx description of exactly what he wants, sure, I suppose it's not exactly that. But if you want to go the other direction, you haven't had pure capitalism either. We do know that we have a spectrum of capitalism. That's what I say in classes. We have this spectrum of government systems. And
right.
We're oversimplifying it by making it one-dimensional, but take me for the time being. Capitalism on one side, socialism on the other. We've got a spectrum of different systems that are there. Some are a little bit closer to here, some are a little bit closer to there, some are in the middle. And if you start looking at trends, this side's doing a lot better than this side. That's about the best way you could say it. But no,
okay.
it's a empty platitude to say any criticism of socialism is moot and null because real socialism has never been tried. That's not a legitimate argument.
Yeah, my argument's always been what I learned when I was younger through lectures. It's just you can't take away human achievement, the desire to achieve and the desire to better oneself. That's somehow, it's been proven that that's in us. And when you attack capitalism or you try to hamper capitalism in favor of a socialist environment, you're basically quelling that or trying to quell that, and it doesn't work.
I mean, that's the real beauty, I think, at the end of it, of a capitalist system, is it takes that inner desire to want to make yourself and your family better off, and it translates that into making society better off.
No question.
So you're pointing in the same direction, and that's good. And you cleave that link when you have, you know, non-private property.
It is an
a
interesting
system of no private property.
And interesting enough, you can say that that's progress, and it's interesting how the word progress has actually been co-opted for the other direction. Progressive or progression is now co-opted more toward a socialist utopia than a capitalist utopia. And so that's what I mean when I said earlier. It's like what is the public being spoon-fed this year, right? What is trendy to say this year? We're so gullible as a people.
I mean, you know,
gobble it up.
As we mentioned earlier, you know, it's still this desire of people to want to have this explained to them in perfect clarity in 5 seconds.
Of course.
You know, like so you just end up down some very weird paths when all you're doing is try to understand complex things in a couple sound bites. You know, it's tough.
It's the lack of critical thinking from the masses, and that's one of the reasons why I do this podcast, is to slow it down and do long form. And because obviously, if we're not taking the time to remember how we were taught to think in stages and everything, we're so triggered right now. I think not even if we're not outwardly expressing it, we're triggered in our own interpretation of what we hear. And I think oftentimes we tend to believe everything we hear, you know, is coming from media as soon as we hear it.
Right. Or which media is it coming from? I'm only going to trust the ones that I think are falling on my side because the other ones are just going to lie to me.
Then you end up in an echo chamber.
Yeah. So, and it goes both ways. That's not a Republican thing or a Democrat thing.
Of course it does.
Both ways.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's why I avoid politics.
Yeah, well, just there's no in
as
the
best
end,
as we can.
In the end, there's no winner. I just worry. Not worry. I care more about my philosophy, and you know, this is very oversimplified, but I'm a pro-business person. I just really love commerce. I love my understanding of capitalism, but I'm also not a heartless bastard. I also, you know, don't I don't believe in greed if it's going to harm others.
But even pro-business has been co-opted to mean, why are you in favor of government bailing out and taking care of businesses that aren't doing well?
Ah, okay.
And it's like,
okay.
Someone could say that and could be in favor of that, but it
Interesting.
also could be, how about the government just gets out of business's way and lets businesses do business things?
Well, ideally, that's more toward pure capitalism.
Sure, right. But I mean, it's just this idea of phrases and just get taken and weaponized in the way that you want.
No, I understand. Yeah, no, I totally get that. It would be really interesting, though. Well, let me ask you this: has there ever been in history, recorded history, have there ever been something closer than what we have to pure capitalism anywhere on the globe?
I mean, there's this index called the Economic Freedom of the World Index, and it tries to, on a scale of 1 to 10, say how much economic freedom an area has by a whole bevy of pretty objective measures that do that. So that's the task they're looking for. So the closer to 10 you are, the more economically free you are, and the closer to 0, the less economically free you are. And so the United States in those rankings tends to come in around 8 to 10th, maybe somewhere in there. It varies a little bit year to year, but Hong Kong tends to be up near the very top. New Zealand tends to be up near the very top.
Really?
Singapore does. So if we want to take that as analogous to more capitalist, which maybe yes or no, but sure, for the time being, that's fine. There are some other places that would have gotten it a little bit more right than us, if you want to say.
So real world differences between Hong Kong to the citizenry, what would that be?
So there's 5, and again, I have to do this from memory, but there's 5 different areas that they measure. So one is size of government, one is openness to international trade, one is sound money, one's maybe property rights, one's maybe labor market freedom.
Okay.
I think those are the 5.
Okay.
And there's different sort of, different rules mean different scores on different things in there. So do you have at will hiring in a labor market, 1 if yes, 0 if no. Is there a middle
Understood.
ground maybe?
Understood.
With regards to sound money, the inflation rate, maybe growth rate of the money supply, do citizens have access to foreign currencies, things like that. So they try and measure all this stuff. The size of the government is, government expenditures and budget deficits and just how much government do we have. So they try and measure all of that and mash it all together and come up with a number that is as objectively measured as possible. This is not a group that's getting together, sitting 4 of us down here and being all right, Hong Kong 1 to 10, how'd they do last year? Feels like an 8, feels like an 8.5, 8.5 is. It's not bad. They actually try to calculate it. And to their credit, they do calculate it, right? I mean, again, that's something that's going to be very difficult to ever do perfectly, but does this at least get us down the path of trying to make some headway on what's going on in these countries and understanding the outcomes? It does. There are a lot of papers have been written using that. And, a lot of the outcomes that you'd expect to see, life expectancy is a lot longer in the free. So they break it up by quartiles. So they always look at the top quartile. They do all 4, but they look at the top compared to the bottom.
Okay.
The freest countries versus the least free countries. And, income per capita much higher in the freer countries, life expectancy, believe it or not, inequality. So it's this thing called the Gini coefficient is how they measure that.
Okay. Actually
not determined at all. It's actually no relationship to it. It tends to be pretty flat across all of those. So it's not like freedom's leading to more inequality.
It's a freedom is not leading to more inequality.
As I understand it, yes.
Okay.
The most recent work that they've done on that is accurate. But yeah, I mean, that's the best way we could try and look at institutional variation across countries and see if we can't make sense. Different rules in different places. We obviously see different results. Can we make any sense of what we're seeing and kind of what's going on there?
I've always been puzzled by that. I heard a lecture once where the gentleman was talking the virtues of capitalism. It's you have a portion of society that wants to kill the golden goose. Capitalism has given us a society where all these incredible things are possible. But you have an element that would like to just wipe it out and start over again.
Markets have given us our life for certain. So it's maybe that's the number one thing that we need to impress upon people, economics wise, is just the value of markets. I mean, we're all kind of talking about the same topic here. But people misunderstand markets and voluntary trade, and it's frustrating.
So the misinterpretation or the misunderstanding of the concept of value leads you think leads to a lot of the envy and mockery of the ultra wealthy in this country.
Well, because if we're going to blame people for having excess profits, you must somehow think that it has to do either with coercively taking that money from other people, which the vast majority of that money, I'm not saying 100% of it, but the vast majority of that money that Jeff Bezos has, these are market transactions, right? There's voluntary transactions, and that comes rooted in the idea that someone's willing to pay for that. Because, why did you buy all these lights? Because you value them more than what the price was to you, right? That's why the trade happens, right? You valued that light at $40 and the price was $25. That's why you did it. You're better off for that, right? And, the idea that someone could have made that light for $5, that's $20 in profit for that individual. Who loses here? You got your light bulb. They made some profit. They generated some.
So why is that so intrinsically evil to some?
Because I don't think people understand that. I think people look at prices.
What's there not to understand?
You'll have to ask them. Okay. That's always the goal of teaching economics, especially to college students, is understanding the market process, understanding what these things mean, being particular about the words value and price and cost, because those all mean different things. A lot of people use them interchangeably in the real world. What did that cost you? What was the price? That they use that interchangeably, and usually you know what people are talking about. But I say that in the classroom too. I'm like, there's a few things we need to be really sticklers about here.
Okay.
The difference in price and cost is a big one, and understanding value, right? And price and value are not the same thing, right? You value something beyond the price. That's why you're willing to trade for it, right? Why are you willing to trade $5 to McDonald's for that meal? Because you value it more than $5.
Correct.
Right? And they value the $5 more. Each side thinks they're getting the steal of the deal there. They're like, McDonald's like, I can't believe you're giving me $5 for this, right? And the person's like, I can't believe you're selling this to me for $5.
I call that a win-win.
Right? It's a win-win. Trade is positive sum is what we talk about. Trade's positive sum. Both sides win. And a lot of people think trade to be zero sum. So basically the amount that I've gained in a trade is the amount that you lose. And it's a mindset that goes way back to like mercantilism, to be honest with you.
That devalues the system then, perceptually.
It would just say mercantilism was the idea that where does the wealth of countries come from? And it's this idea that it comes from how much like what's called specie, or like physical gold, let's say, just for this example. So like think of Scrooge McDuck and like the big old pile of gold. Like that makes him really, really wealthy. And therefore that's what makes an economy and a country really, really wealthy.
Got it.
So when it comes to international trade, think about, like, let's say I buy something from you. Okay. So I'm the United States and you're Germany, let's say. And so I buy something from you. So you send me the good, I send you the specie, right? I send you the money, right? That's how the transaction works. Okay. Mercantilism says we're worse off for that because we don't have as much specie. We don't have as much of that gold. We're worse off, right? So it's this idea that exports are great. You exported to me. You got the specie, so you're better off, but I'm equally and oppositely worse off, right? So it's this idea that trade is zero sum.
And a loser.
Right. So I think a lot of people are rooted in that. Like, I think a lot of people are rooted in this idea that I spend my $5 at McDonald's and I'm $5 worse off. Yes, I ate, but I'm $5 worse off.
Well, you might be eating that stuff.
But it's this,
No, I get what you're saying.
I think it's rooted in that. And again, I mean, look, we've been talking for how long here about just this topic here. To flesh it out and to give the example, who's gonna go beyond? Yeah, you're $5 worse off. Didn't you just pay $5 at McDonald's? That's the argument. Like,
of course it is.
It's like, that's not like, we got to dig deeper for that. But when it's quick, that's why it's nice to have like the one hitters, examples, things like that.
So for all the years you've been teaching economics, have you ever had a student or a group of students present you a philosophical debate in class? Like, I know some students might take economics because they must for their degree, but they might not believe in American economics. They might believe in socialism. They might believe. Have you ever had any of those philosophical debates in class?
Probably not a whole lot of that. Where it might come up is we do some lectures on arguments against trade, or like arguments for protectionism in the United States. Like, should we protect our industries? And invariably, some of the arguments do go more down the philosophical or the moral path. Like, what's a reason to to hamper trade with another country, since we know trade makes both of us better off? Is there a reason that we might want to do that? And one of the arguments could be, well, there's child labor in that country, and morally, I just don't think we should ever be trading with people that have child labor. The issue economically is more complex than that when it comes to child labor. But if you take a stance that child labor is morally wrong and we shouldn't trade, I'd say fine. That's a philosophical stance on that, or a moral stance, or an ethical stance. I'm not good at discriminating between those words. But that's beyond the scope of economics. That's saying you believe something to be wrong and therefore you shouldn't do it. And so those arguments we could explore in class. And that's fine. It's just usually when we get there, I go, we try and do in this class what's called positive economics as much as possible. Positive as opposed to normative. So positive is just going to be facts, theory, coming to conclusions. Minimum wage is going to lead to a decrease in the quantity of labor demanded. Let's say that, right? Like, we have models, we know that, we could test that, we see it out, like, we know that's the case. Someone could still come in and say, I believe there should be a minimum wage, right? And you could make an economic argument for that. But, and if that's where they want to go, then we can do that in class. I go, but realize you're never in this class going to be harmed or penalized for your normative stance on things, as long as you're making economic arguments in support of them. Right? Because you could say, look, yes, the workers that still have jobs would be making a higher wage, not necessarily a higher compensation, but a higher wage. There could be some unemployment offset because of that. Some fewer people may be working. But I believe that trade-off is worth it. I personally don't agree, but at least you've made an economic argument. Good for you.
Okay.
I would, I'm happy when students can get there. Be like, there's trade-offs. Everything has trade-offs. Everything has trade-offs. Minimum wage is no exception. There are trade-offs, and given those trade-offs, this is my stance. And that is because I think A is worth B and B is not worth A.
Okay.
Good. At least you're making an economic argument.
Got it. Right turn for a second. So one thing that always puzzled me, and I'd love to hear someone from academia in your field actually maybe help me understand this.
I'm not the normal economist to be answering questions like this.
Oh, no. You're the perfect guy.
I look at wagering markets a lot.
I know you do. I know. We're going to get there. I figured I'd take you on a ride for the first 60 minutes. The thing that puzzles me is the tax law that we have in this country, where, and I'm sure there's a name for this, and I don't have it at the tip of my tongue, but basically, the more you make, the greater percentage of tax they take from you, which when you sit back and you even try to explain it to anybody and you take the tax out of it, you just talk about a system that does that. The average person is going to go, well, that's not right. That penalizes somebody.
You're really not going to like the name of that tax system.
What's that tax?
It's called a progressive tax system.
Progressive tax system. Okay, I've heard that before. But it really is, to me, the most egregious thing when it comes to a lot of capitalism in America today. Not capitalism, but the way we manage capitalism in this country. Our government does and taxes us. It's so egregious that the more productive you are, the harder you work, the more you achieve, the more you build and create, and you're rewarded for this creativity, you're then disproportionately taken from. I say stolen, but you're disproportionately taken from. It doesn't make logical sense to my brain. What is the argument used to justify that?
I would say the argument that to me would make the most sense or hold the most water would be something kind of based in the following. We've got people at all these different ranges of incomes, like across the board, some people on the low end, some people on the high end. But there are some things that we all need to live. So like we all need food and we all need shelter. And there's just all these things that we all have to pay for, not in the same amounts, but we kind of have to pay for that stuff in order to live your life. And if you view it in those terms, and I realize that's not a tax in the formal sense, but if you view all those like necessities as a tax in the sense that you, not by dictate of the government, but just by life, you have to pay that stuff, they would argue that tax is going to be very, very heavily regressive. That's the opposite of progressive. So like as a percent of their income, they're having to pay more for all of that other stuff that's out there that you need to live, clothing and all that, whatever that may be. So maybe then to try and offset that, it might make sense to tax people a little bit more with an income tax at higher income levels. That's about the best argument that I've heard for a progressive tax system. Aside from, so arguments like that are fine. I think they're only worth visiting so long because there is no way politically you'd ever end up with anything other than a progressive tax system. There's just no way. There's just way too many people at the lower end that would want to be taxing the higher end at a higher rate. That's just how it has to turn out. Not saying that's good or bad, but
you're saying we had no choice. It has to be this way.
I'm just saying that the realities of how we do democracy and elections, that if anyone came in as like, you know what, rich people, poor people, people in the middle, let's all pay 20%, cut every deduction, and just off we go. People would be like, no way, that's not fair. The rich should be paying more. The rich should be paying more. They, it's also based on the idea of, well, they have so much more. Shouldn't they pay so much more? Again, I'm not saying these are the perfect watertight arguments, but these are, if that's your political motivation as a budding politician moving forward, is to try and get away from a progressive income tax system in this country.
It seems logical to me. I don't care about the left or the right at all. Just step back from it and try to look at it logically. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
One kind of snarky argument that I've heard people make is, let's say you're high income, and by high income, people usually mean high wealth on this thing too. Mm-hmm. So they try and use those interchangeably, even though they're technically not the same thing. One big thing that our taxes pay for is national defense. Don't you, as a high wealth individual, have so much more to lose than someone that's low wealth? Just like you've
shitty argument.
I understand, but then they say, well, if you agree with that, then maybe shouldn't people that are having more of their wealth protected by the army, shouldn't they pay more for that army? Again, not putting my horse in front of any of these carts, but these are the arguments that people have made, or at least ones that seem halfway intriguing to me, and don't just kind of die on arrival.
It doesn't incentivize people.
Yeah, I mean, the higher when you increase taxes on anything, it discourages that action. Increase sales taxes on red T-shirts, you're discouraging people from buying red T-shirts. And increase taxes on generating income, insofar as you view income as generating value. Like income's connected to the value that you create. You're disincentivizing the creation of value. You are, absolutely, you are.
Yeah, it's never made any sense to me at all. And again, I understand the concept of lower income having to pay the same amount as a higher income when it obviously that rate affects them much greater than the wealthy. I get that, but it almost like makes sense. Can't we go no income tax to a certain level and then start 15-18% from there? I mean, if you cut the taxes, wouldn't that generate more tax revenue? Yeah.
People have always done studies looking at this idea of responsiveness to changes in taxes. There's this curve called the Laffer curve in economics, and it tries to relate the relationship of the tax rate that you're imposing and the tax revenue that you generate from that rate. And one of the big lessons is simply increasing. Well, first off, doubling the tax rate is not going to double the tax revenue. So like if you're at 5% right now, let's say you're a local government and you're at 5% right now and you need to build a new bridge and you determine you need twice the revenue, doubling the tax rate is not going to double the tax revenue, right? And then when you get to the very upper end of the Laffer curve, the idea that maybe even increasing tax rates might decrease tax revenue. Like if you get high enough, you might actually lose revenue, right? Usually those rates are estimated to be pretty high, like 60, 70% for income. But nevertheless, that's still going to exist as a range, and it should be understood that it's out there. But a lot of studies have looked at changing, federal tax rates and, how do the rich respond to these changes in tax rates. And, revenue tends to be pretty steady, which is saying that, people are pretty responsive, at least at the high end of the income distribution, to changes in tax rates, moving money to places where it's not going to be taxed. They're pretty sensitive to that, and they will move around. And it's such that, what you see is maybe you lower the tax rate, revenue stays about the same. Maybe you raise the tax rate, the revenue stays about the same. It's just the tax base that's adjusting, and you end up with similar revenue at the end of the day.
Really?
That's an oversimplification, but broadly speaking, yes.
I don't know. It just seems it discourages additional achievement. I know when I had the guitar business.
Certainly. If you compared a 0% income tax rate with a 40% income tax rate, unquestionably, yes. Right. The question is, on the margin, how much does it? If we raise it from 35% to 36%, would it change a lot?
6%.
Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. A problem with that argument is, you know, if we change it from 20 to 21, do we see a lot of people changing how much they work? Probably not, right? 21 to 22, maybe not. But then we keep playing this game, and now you're comparing 20 to 40, and now that's going to matter, right?
Oh, you're saying it's a gradual increase,
Right. So
Yeah.
you know, you could say right now, what if I don't know what was it 38%? Is that the highest federal tax? Let's say it's 38%. What if they made it 38.1% next year? And everything, obviously, nothing else always stays the same, but everything else stayed constant. Would we really see a lot of people working a lot less? Probably not. You know, probably not. Our models would have to dictate that they would work a little bit less, but you know, probably not. But if you know, you got to compare the big changes, you know, because I think the way you're thinking about it is 0 to 40.
Right.
And that's yes. Unquestionably yes.
Right.
Period.
Right.
End of story. You know, problem is we're always in this like incremental world that finds us now with tax rates that are pretty high.
Yeah, that's how we're lulled to sleep
Yeah.
until we wake up one day and go, how the hell did we get here?
Right. You know the highest marginal income tax in U.S. history? You know what that was? I think it was right after World War II. And I think it was Truman that did it.
90% or something?
I think it was 94% is what it was. But it was at a level that only applied to like less than 100 people.
What was it, I think, when we came out of the 70s, right? Or when Reagan became, I think it was pretty
I don't
pretty
know.
hefty then.
Offhand,
Yeah, I
it's
think it was-
easy to look that up, but no, I don't know that offhand.
Yeah, I think it was pretty hefty then too. I don't know.
Remember getting that first paycheck when you're like, the withholding, you're like, God, come on.
Every kid goes through.
Oh yeah,
that.
of
My
course.
son
That's
went.
important. We should take more advantage of that. That should be a big teaching moment. Like, right, that needs to be like that frustration and that angst and that bitterness that from deep within, it's seeing that for like stoke that
But
fire.
then what happens?
Stoke that
though?
fire in the
But-
kid.
But what happens though that doesn't even
Hopefully a healthy distrust for the government. That's what you're hoping
right?
happens.
Of course.
That's why we need to stoke that flame.
Yes.
It's like you got the flint going, and you got to feed the little sticks on there. And you got to get the thing going
But to a portion of the population, it doesn't stick.
because they didn't have that. The anger wasn't.
I guess so. Anger is an energy. Yes. Yes, indeed.
Maybe not anger. Maybe anger's not the right. I'm not doing a good job picking the right words today. The
Discomfort.
frustration. Frustration. There we go.
Anxiety. They're taking my money.
Disbelief.
Yeah, I remember.
I remember it too.
I remember I worked under the table for a little pizza shop,
Yeah.
you know, and I used to making what I made, and I took it all home. I was a kid. Got that first real job,
Yep.
18 years old, got that first paycheck. I could not believe.
Oh yeah. Uncle Sam wanted a bit.
I couldn't believe. Yeah, it hasn't gotten any easier since either, man.
And everything's like, and maybe this even feeds into it. Everything. I'm trying to think the last time I actually got a physical paycheck. I think it was the very first one at Duquesne because you need like the physical one before the direct deposit can go.
Right.
So I'm like never looking. I rarely look at pay stubs.
Yeah.
It's just, it's just like that's the number that shows up every couple of weeks. You know.
Right. No, I get it. Do you remember the early 90s?
So I was born in 1979.
So
So,
like
I was about 10.
tell-
Glory days for our Oakland A's, by the way.
Oh, coming out of the 80s for sure, man. Coming out of the 80s for sure.
Coming out hot, yeah.
The reason I bring it up is because I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he said, I think we need a good recession. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? He goes, well, one of the few things I like to do is go out to like a Applebee's or, some place and have a cocktail, have something to eat, and the service is atrocious. And I'm like, where are you going with this? He goes, well, I think back to the early 90s when Bush 1 was in and we were going through like a recession in 91, 92, kind of like through 93 a little bit. And you had MBAers out there serving tables. And that was the best level of service and attention and kindness I've ever gotten from And I'm like, that is your whole basis why you want a recession? Because you want better service?
There's
His point was that like that was an era that was like, that's not where we are today. There's very low unemployment now, right?
Yes.
And at that time there was higher unemployment, but it gave a better quality of life as a consumer.
There's a
give and take all the time. Right?
There's this dynamic in macroeconomics where you could do what's called partial equilibrium analysis, or you could do general equilibrium analysis.
What does that mean?
Partial equilibrium analysis means you're just looking at the impact in one market. So to complete the analogy, your friend's just looking in the service market. If you do the general analysis, there might be some other stuff going on that might end up outweighing the service.
I'm absolutely sure of it, but I got what he was saying though, because
That feels like a good little stand-up bit, though. Like it's just everyone knows you're kind of BSing with this, but you got a good little nugget. So why don't you move forward with it?
Yeah, he's honest.
Be a good, yeah.
But I do remember the early '90s, and that was the case. Jobs were scarce, and you had some overqualified people working a lot of service positions.
Sure.
Yeah. I hope we're not going to go back to that, but that's
No, labor market's still pretty tight at this point. So we'll see.
When you say tight, you mean like we have
low unemployment? Yeah.
Low unemployment. So there's a lot of jobs. Like, is it kind of
hard for employers to find employees?
It certainly is. So usually there's a push and pull with economics, right? But I find it interesting. Like inflation's high, gas prices is high, but there's a plethora of jobs out there. That's not really the way it's been traditionally in the past, right?
Yeah. Usually, when you see recessions and unemployment, when we put these graphs that I was telling you about earlier from the Federal Reserve, when you put them up, no matter what series it is you're looking at, whether it's the unemployment rate or whatever it is, they always in the background have these like gray bars throughout the years. And those gray bars represent recessions.
Okay.
And so like when you just look at the unemployment rate, I put it up there on the board when we're talking about unemployment. So what do you guys see? What do you see with regards to the gray areas and the unemployment rate? What do you see? I mean, like in a gray area, in a gray, usually unemployment goes up during recessions.
Right.
I suppose you could say, I believed, we were talking a little bit about this earlier. I believe they declared a recession in early/mid 2020 when they shut everything down. It may have been less than 6 months, but I believe, don't quote me on that. I believe they did declare that to be a recession. I suppose you did see a very big relationship there between a recession and unemployment over those months like March to June 2020.
Shutting the economy down?
Yeah. Unemployment went up to like, as calculated, it was like 30% or something, and then obviously, came back down. But this is unique. No, it's unique that the job market's pretty strong. People, at least the word on the street is, employers having a hell of a time trying to find employees.
No doubt.
That's usually not the case in recessionary times.
Right.
It's usually not. So again, it's been a hell of a time to teach macro these last couple of years. It's been interesting to look at this stuff, and I'm not a macro person, as I'm proving here today.
You fool me.
Maybe that's the problem. No, it's interesting. We're living in unique times with regards to the economy, because so much of teaching macro in the 20 teens, is that what we call it, the 2010s, whatever that was. It's just like ships humming along. Like you just at least there's like interesting things to talk about now. At least it's just like students could say, oh, I read this in the paper, or I heard some story about blah, or this hasn't happened since then. It's like, all right, let's go look into it then. It's one nice thing about macro is there's a lot of data to throw at the issue. A lot of fun things that I look at in micro sometimes don't have data that's readily available, which is frustrating. Macro, I'm not a macro guy, but macro certainly doesn't lack for a trove of data.
All right, let's turn our attention to markets then.
Markets.
Yes. So what has been on your cranium recently?
For wagering markets. I finished up a couple of papers that I'd kind of been bouncing around for the last couple of years. I may have talked about them here. Finished up a paper on Calcutta auctions. That is an auction system where the data we have are from a private NCAA tournament Calcutta auction. So you have 64 teams in the NCAA tournament.
Right.
Technically it's 68, but you just count those first pairings as just one team. So you have 64 teams in the NCAA tournament. We are going to sequentially auction these teams off depending on how many games. So if you win in auctions, you paid the most for that team.
Okay.
You get paid off a known beforehand percentage of the overall pot collected from all auctions together, and that's what your team pays off. So for example, if you win one game, maybe you get 1% of the total pot. If you win two games, maybe you get 2.5% of the total pot, et cetera, where the winning team gets like, I don't know, 15%. You could set these wherever you like. Calcutta auctions tend to like group themselves around these common numbers that a lot of people use. So the question to you, if it's the NCAA tournament, and there, by necessity, there's at least 2 different ways that you could order these auctions. Okay, the way that this group orders it is they do all the lowest seeds first, all the way up to the top ones. So they do like 16 seeds, 16, 16, 16, 15, 15, 15, 14, 14, 14.
Okay.
All the way up to 1. You also, there are Calcutta auctions out there that do it drawn out of a hat. So you don't know who's coming up next. You know who's coming up next in the other way, but you don't know who's coming up next this one. Let's assume we're doing it that way. Who was really good last year? Gonzaga. They were pretty good, weren't they? Mm-hmm. Let's say you draw Gonzaga first.
Okay.
How much do you pay for them? It's a hard question to answer.
Certainly.
Because the calculus that you're trying to figure in your mind is, what do I pay? What am I expected to get back? But you don't have any information on who's paying anything for anyone else. What if you get Gonzaga for $1 and then the poll like explodes? That's the greatest purchase ever. What if you think it's going to be huge? You go like 12,000 and then it peters out.
Right.
You might not even get all your investment back if they win.
Right. Probably not.
Well, actually, the math wouldn't work that way. But nevertheless, you've got this variation in outcomes, and it's at this unique intersection of like all these existing wagering markets that we've studied. It's like there's a fixed portion to it in the sense that the percentages don't change, and you know what percentages are going in, and the amount that you paid for your entrant, that doesn't change. Like there's a lot that stays fixed in this, but there's a lot that's variable too. Like you don't know the pot size.
Right.
That's a function of everyone else's behavior along with yours.
Right.
Because you don't know the pot size, you don't know the exact payout. So like if you make a money line bet on the A's tomorrow,
okay,
you know what you put down. Mm-hmm. If they win, you know what you win at the time you make the bet.
Absolutely.
Not the case in a Calcutta auction. You don't know. There's that uncertainty. Unless it's the only time you know all of that is the very last one that you're betting, right? The very, very last one. So there's just, it's unique. And there's, no one's ever looked at it before. I tend to find myself down the path of doing things people haven't looked at as opposed to trying to improve upon what other people have done. So it's been fun. I've thought these auctions, my friend of mine's been telling me about these things for a while now. I think we've got 12 or 13 years of data.
Calcutta auctions.
Calcutta auctions.
Who named that?
It was, I've looked into this, and there's just not a lot of information about these things out there. It appears to have been the case that there were horse races done in Calcutta in India that were not exactly this structure, but they kind of resembled it. It was something like, let's say we have a horse race, and there would be 10 winning tickets, 10 vouchers sold for each entrance in the race. Let's say we've got 8 horses in the race. So there's 10 for horse 1, 10 for horse 2, 10 for horse 3. Then people would go out and buy those. But I think the price for those were fixed. And then there'd be a market secondary to that where people would start trading them around and buying them for more and less. I think that's how that market worked. I'm like, that's 90% of it. I might be a little bit off, but that's more or less, I think, what happened. So it was, I think, mimicking that secondary market of people paying different amounts, but still getting that fixed amount from the win.
Okay.
Something to that effect. But no, as I wrote in the paper, I said, there's one other paper from 2003, let's say,
all right,
that talked about Calcutta auctions. I didn't really understand it that well, but it was basically using Calcutta auctions to try and value startup firms for venture capitalists. Some mechanism that would work there, which is cool. Like, that's fine. I just when I read the paper and I realized it wasn't really going down my path, I'm like, so I kind of wrote in the paper that I wrote, I said, in 2003, so-and-so wrote this paper about using Calcutta auctions to value, startup firms in a venture capital capacity. I said, clearly that's kind of orthogonal to what we're talking about here.
Sure.
That's not what we're getting at. They wrote in that paper, no one's ever written anything about Calcutta auctions. And no one cited that paper since. I'm the first one to cite it. So I think my line was some of the effect of, despite there being voluminous literature on auctions taking place in India, this appears to be the first paper trying to look at this as a wagering market and understanding what's going on. So that's one thing I was looking at. And that's fun. I like that paper, and that was good. And that's out right now, getting reviewed. And then I need to send out another paper. I was planning on doing it this week, but I don't think I'm going to be able to. This is going to be very boring to you, but think about like a futures wagering market. So like, if you go right now, you can go to any of a number of sites and you could be giving odds on who's going to win the AL Cy Young. Okay.
Yes.
Maybe this one's like plus 200, 300, 400, whatever. Some of them are really extensive. I've seen them upwards of like 50 names. That's usually earlier in the season. But like there's a lot of names. Now they kind of narrow it down because you kind of know who the good guys are. But so that's a futures market. Think of a money line. So A's versus Royals.
Right.
Like that could be a game. Okay. So maybe the A's are like plus 150 and the Royals are like minus 135.
Okay.
Through equations, you could figure out what the implied subjective probability is. So, like, if you have some assumptions about the nature of, like, the commission, the commission, the VIG, stuff like that, expected returns, you could punch those numbers into an equation. It'll spit out the subjective probability. So, for something like that, the A's would be like, 42%, and the Royals would be like 58%. Let's say that's an implied subjective probability. Then, what we do typically in like baseball wagering market papers that I've written is for all those teams that have been given a 58% chance to win by the market. Do they actually win 58% of the time? Or do they win more? Do they win less? Do we have enough statistical information to say that that's different? Or is it just kind of noise? It's not strong enough. So to that end, for that futures market, there's a way that you can come up with the subjective probability of all those people winning.
Okay.
Different math that you have to do.
I get it.
So there's an existing way of doing it. It's called fair odds, and everyone just kind of assumes that's the way to be done. I came up with a different way that kind of favors the favorites a little more. Mathematically, it's all the Greek letters and all that stuff. The favorites are a little more favority, and the underdogs a little more underdoggy in mine. But it's not by much. It's I mean, it depends particularly on what you want to come up with. But it's ultimately, it's interesting to think, because this is math at the end of the day. It's interesting to think. Like, one thing, I've always liked math, and I've always been pretty good at math. And the nice thing about math is you're always working toward an answer. Like, there's an answer you're working towards. That's always what especially when I was in high school, I remember sitting there. I'm probably going to get shit for this. I remember sitting there in math class. I love math. I was really good at math. And, took a bunch of physics classes in college and econ. There's just a lot of math. I've always been decent at math. And then I'd go to, like, English class. Mostly English class, or not even necessarily history class. And I've always read really, really slow, so maybe like the cards were stacked against me. But I remember we had one in high school. I was a junior, and the teacher we had was like very like free love kind of hippie style. And so while the chairs were in a circle in a classroom to facilitate conversation, which is a good thing. We didn't like sit in our, the seats with the desk, like the little desk that you wrote on. We sat like on the floor, like, cross-legged, chatting, because that's, we're just, free love and all that stuff, right? And so just going back and forth, and I just, whatever book it was we were reading, student raised their hand. Well, I think, protagonist one was feeling this because of A, B, and C. Okay, good. And then like another person, I feel like the antagonist was not given their fair shake because they didn't feel this. Yeah, okay. So I'm like, it's like happy fucking love time, man. Like, just anyone's spitting anything out, and it's like everyone's just, it's happy to, like, let's just share feelings about this and what I think. And I've dialed a bit back on that. I came from a very cynical point there in high school of just being like, in literature, there's all this symbolism, and I believe it to be there. I was just very skeptical of it at the time, and because I wasn't a very good, quick reader, I think reading was always kind of difficult for me. I'm a math person.
Yeah.
And so you'd get to some book, Catcher in the Rye, or whatever it is, right? Great works of art, right? And
debatable.
Well, sure. And again, I'm trying to pull you back on my economic takes here. You really shouldn't be getting me for the literature takes. And I just remember, that's symbolic of people going off to war. And I'm like, I mean, it could be, but it also couldn't be. Like, it also, like, do we have the guy on record as like saying like that? Because if not, I mean, it's suggestive of that. I agree. But to say, I mean,
you took it way too literal.
It probably is. But all I'm saying is it probably is. But all I'm saying is, like, it could possibly not be. It could also maybe not be. So how do we know? And that certainty of math always made me happy. Anyway, we're way off track now. Anyway, that certainty of math, what I find funny about doing things like this is, doesn't it seem like when I tell you we've got that money line and we've calculated it with this formula of 58% and 42%, doesn't it seem that's the answer? Like, I've just gotten to the answer. There's like 7 different ways to calculate that. Different assumptions, all that.
I understand.
It's interesting to me that it's not that it's not settled. It's not that it's not settled because no one's no one's trying to settle it because you have different assumptions lead you to different places.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
It's still, you take a step back and you're like, how do we know it's not 41, not 42? Like, why can't we solve this? It's math. Aren't we doing math? So to that end, you've got this fair odds way of calculating subjective probabilities from futures odds.
Right.
I'm doing it a slightly different way that gives internally consistent estimates, just different estimates.
Different,
and it's
right.
ultimately an empirical question of, do the numbers at the end of the day look more like mine or more like theirs? Or do they fall in the middle? They probably fall in the middle, to be honest with you.
You're just a different way of doing it.
It is, yeah. The fair odds way is a way of... I'm trying to think of a way.
Fair odds.
It's called fair odds. It's basically...
What a concept. Fair odds.
It's basically like... I'm trying to think of the easiest way to describe this. Basically, think of what the return to that bet would be, because like a plus 150 bet's going to return less than like a plus 300 is going to return less than a plus 400.
Right.
I'm sorry, I was going down my path. Think about that line alone by itself is implying a subjective probability all by itself. Mm-hmm. Do that for all of them.
Okay.
Add up all those subjective probabilities. It's always going to come up to a number bigger than 1.
Okay.
1.1 or whatever it's going to be. Then you take that number that you added up to and then divide the subjective probability by that, and that's your actual subjective probability at the end of the day. So like if you calculated 150 as, I think that's 40% actually.
Right.
40%, and then we added it up and then we divide it by that number, it may end up actually being the fair odds is going to be like 37% instead of 40.
Okay.
So you just have to like have a criteria, both of our systems, have a criteria for all of the bets, basically like aggregate them, adjust accordingly, such that now when we've done it, because it doesn't make sense to have 10 or 15 subjective probabilities that add up to a 1.15. No, it needs to add to 1.
Got it.
Has to add to 1. That's the point of probabilities, is they always add up to
think?
1. So you adjust that and off you go. Mine is, let's say, how much do you need to bet on each entrant such that the return at the end of the day on all of them is equal? So for example, let's do a simple one. Let's say in the Super Bowl, the Bengals are plus 100 and the Rams are plus 1,000.
Okay.
I realize that's not what the line was, but just throw it out there. I would need to bet 10 times as much on the Bengals
Right.
than I would on the Rams, right? So then we add all that up and basically just take the ratios of that, add it up, divide, move through the process, and get a subjective probability in that manner. I call it quasi-parimutuel because you're kind of doing a parimutuel thing when you do that, at least in my mind, you are. It still produces consistent estimates, which is nice. Obviously, consistency is a good thing when it comes to math.
No doubt.
But yeah, and then I just did a couple of examples there. I've just always liked wagering markets, and those were kind of ideas that had banging around for a little bit that were mostly done. I just kind of cleaned them up and got them to where they needed to be and out the door.
It's interesting to me when I look at take FanDuel, right? So the money line, and then you take, or let's say hockey. There's always the money line, then there's 1.5.
Yes.
It's interesting to look at the difference in percentage between the money line and the 1.5 and compare them from game to game, and it just never. There's no real uniformity.
Really?
Doesn't appear to be. No.
I bet you could systematically look at that and maybe find something.
You probably could, but to my casual eye, no.
Yeah, the nice thing about wagering data too is you're dealing with a lot. The baseball wagering stuff that I've done. That the Calcutta auctions paper I was telling you about is less than 1,000 observations. As wagering market stuff goes, that's very small. Wow. But that's all. I mean, people, I'm sure referees will complain about the size of the data set, to which you're not wrong. 800 as it comes to wagering markets is minuscule. Go ahead and show me the other people that are looking at this that have bigger data, and I'm more than happy to try and do what they're doing. This is the first thing that's been done. And I'm very clear in the paper too, this is a very first step into something that could have a ton of data thrown at this. And I think these Calcutta auctions are starting to get more popular too.
Okay.
There's a lot of data I think that could be thrown at these things. So as a first stab at it, just as a framework of how to look at these things, I think is useful. But when it comes to the baseball wagering market stuff, I mean, we're in the tens of thousands of observations there, 20, 30, 40,000 observations. You're betting on every single team, every single game across all those seasons because there's 2 bets per game.
Question. So there's a bunch of these online companies that did have service. The FanDuel, and there's like just a bunch of them. Why are all of their lines different? Are they all creating their own odds internally and managing that, or is there do they pull from a clearinghouse? Is there one basic official location of data?
I would say, I don't know this with certainty. I would say the really big sites, like the FanDuels and the big ones out there, they might be employing people to set lines for them, or actually, probably more accurately, have their people writing their own algorithms to generate these lines automatically. So you can have variation algorithms across sites. That could be a reason. But I think you might find there's a lot of places to bet. More uniformity than you'd think, because I think there's kind of central places that are establishing lines, and maybe like, so you could bet on the app called The Score. Like you could bet on that one if you want to.
Right.
I don't know. If I had to guess, I don't think they're employing people to set lines. I think they're pulling from somewhere else, and maybe they pay a service to pull lines for them and just go with that line. But I mean, there's variation in lines. That's a big thing. I know we talked about it before. Mm-hmm. James Holzhauer writes a monthly column in The Athletic that just kind of pulls back the curtain on sports wagering, because he's a professional sports wagerer. Mm-hmm. And I know we've gone over this before too, but like how refreshing in this day and age that he could just have a column that just talks about this in very plain terms and talks about the strategies behind this and how you move forward. Yes, as opposed to, wow, look at this seedy guy. When he was, I know I've said this before, but like when he was on Jeopardy, like, he was, the announcer guy, whatever his name is, comes out and says,
Alex Trebek.
No, the like Johnny Gilbert.
Johnny Gilbert.
Right. Thank you, Johnny. A professional sports gambler, I think is what they described him as. Uh-huh. If that was 10 years before, there's no way they would have said that. There would have been like a resident of Las Vegas, or they would have found something that wouldn't have used those terms. I know.
Yeah, definitely.
But anyway, when he talks about it, because he's made a living of it, clearly he knows what he's doing. What are the strategies? And his whole thing is you need to have a system, you need to stick to it. You don't become a successful sports wagerer by like going big on the Super Bowl and winning. It's getting 52% over the long haul. Like that's how you do this.
Consistent numbers.
And a big thing he always talks about is like, you got to be signed up with a bunch of different books, because the best line matters. Uh-huh. If you can get 160 versus 150,
especially in baseball, right?
But like, not only that, but like, this isn't one, like this is over and over and over. Like if there's that better line that pops, like you gotta find, don't just find the first one.
That's a job.
There's services and there's apps that now tell you like across a range of places, like that must be known, maybe like these 4 use the same service, these 4, but they've got here are the different lines from the different places. If you're interested in betting on this game, they have it updated live. And so like right now, if you can get the A's 152 instead of 148, you do it, because those are the margins that get it. Yeah, it's that stuff, and sticking to your model. And if also good like post hoc reasoning as well. Like you could have made a very good bet, a very wise bet, a high expected value bet that you still lose. Like you could have made the right bet and you lose. Like don't punish. Like you can't. You need to sit back and assess your system for its merits, not whether you win the bets or lose the bets, because then you just get too blinds.
Myopic, like just
right.
Yeah.
Because students sometimes have a tough time grasping that one. I say, all right, if I say, if you make a bet, you give me $1, and if I flip heads, you get $5, and flip tails, you get $2. What would you bet? And they're like, heads. I go, it comes up tails. Did you make a bad bet? Right? It's the trying to separate the, these are uncertain outcomes that we're wagering on. There's uncertainty to it. You could have made the right decision with uncertainty, right? Question. I mean, and that goes to everything in life, right? I mean, you could have made the bad decision to get in your car after having a beer too many, and you got home. Did you make a good decision? It's everywhere. I mean, it's just trying to separate the process from the outcome.
Risk versus uncertainty.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Okay. That's a good one.
You brought it to me.
I did. Okay. Risk. No, that's a good one. I think that was Frank Knight, the old University of Chicago economist. I think was the first one that really fleshed that out in the book. So risk is like anything that's going to be basically calculable at the end of the day. So like, let's say we're trying to decide if we're going to start a restaurant or not. That there's a risk to that. And the important thing is that we could actually put a number to that. So for example, we'll talk two different. Risk involves Risk involves probability distributions. Let's get off the restaurant thing. Let's go back a step. Risk involves probability distributions of things happening, a certain probability of some things happening, other things happening. There's two ways we could determine those probabilities.
Okay.
Either we know what those probabilities are, like a priori, like we know, like rolling a die. I know there's 1/6. Like we know that. Or you could look at like historical precedent and like figure it out. So let's say we do decide to start a restaurant. That's a risky proposition. Well, how risky is that? Maybe 30% fail in the first year historically, looking back over the last 50 years, let's say. And maybe another 20% fail after 5 years, and the rest are fine for whatever. We could use those numbers in our calculations moving forward to see if it's a worthy, net profit or net present value prospect, because we have the numbers. And so that's one nice thing about risk is you can calculate. Like risk doesn't challenge us moving forward. That's not a hurdle. That's just something that you deal with. It's like another cost if you want to think of it like that.
Okay.
For our restaurant, is the cost of food a hurdle to our success? Is the cost of tables a hurdle to our success? I mean, I guess because it's a cost, but you could work around that and you could estimate around that and you could move forward and see whether it's worthwhile or not. Well, risk is just the same way. It's just another thing you got to factor in, but we can factor it in. That's the important part.
Okay.
Uncertainty you can't factor in. So like uncertainty is that kind of thing where there's no probability distribution that you can get to. There's no reasonable probability distribution that you can get to. And without thinking this all the way through, I may get crap from my economist friends for this, but without thinking this through, I would say the following. So March 2020 hits. Okay, let's say you started a restaurant in January of 2020. Say November of 2019, before even any word of this got out.
Okay.
You had a risk profile that we just talked about.
Yep.
X% chance of this, I know my costs, all of that, and mashed it all together. Makes sense. Let's go forward. Let's do it. Let's open it up. Then March 2020 happens, and your restaurant didn't make it. What was the nature of the reasons, and what could you have known moving forward? Well, you understood the risks of closing. 1 year, 5 years, all of that. But the pandemic, I won't even necessarily say the pandemic itself couldn't have been risked away. Could you have come up perhaps with some risk model of some global pandemic happening? That might be a stretch. And certainly you wouldn't have got the very, very low probability tail outcome of that. But that is something you could have figured in. What I don't think you could have figured in, and I don't think where the uncertainty in this process lies, is the policy response. That you couldn't have reasonably guessed. You couldn't have reasonably guessed that, oh my God, there's this crazy thing. Everyone shuts. Like that was an unheard of world prior to it.
Got it.
You couldn't have worked that in.
Got it.
The argument, as I see it, that matters here is risk is just another, it's not a cost, but it's just another thing you can calculate that you need to calculate. That's not going to prevent us from progress. Uncertainty, especially from the policy angle of things, that is an impediment to progress, right? Because if you have enough of that uncertainty popping up, people are going to, in our example, maybe hesitate on the margin, hesitate to start a restaurant, or maybe hesitate to start a business. That uncertainty in the long term, I don't like that. Right? We talk about uncertainty a lot too with regards to politics. And sadly, maybe our country is going that way. But I always say, imagine you're in a developing country. Pick whatever one you want in your mind. We don't need to single any out. Could you imagine a situation where you're considering starting a business, but you're also connected with a political party? And if your party doesn't win, they're going to come and shut your business down or throw you in jail or take your business away from you. Like, that's on the table. And sadly, a fair number of places, probably more than a fair number of places. That's not good. That is not good at all. That prevents that kind of long-term horizon thinking. And one big thing, there's always these papers in macro that are like, what are the variables that actually matter? In like, there's so many macro papers written over the decades of like, what are the determinants of economic growth? Do you need a lot of capital? Do you need human capital? Do you need foreign investment? Like any possible combination of variables have been tried. Just a truckload of papers over the decades have been written about this.
Okay.
And so people try to write these meta-analyses of like, well, trying to see the forest from the trees. What are the things that like tend to be positive or like significant more often than not? And one big thing that is identified is like long-term investment. Like that's a big one. Like long-term, like long time horizon investment. Like not just
how you do it in a country like that.
Exactly. Well, that's the point. And that's like, that might be a big explanation as to why you don't see that, like, long-term economic growth that you've seen in successful countries. Like look at my example, it's now dated, but I'd always tell the students, I go, look at that new skyscraper that PNC just built downtown with the big triangle or the diamond on the top. I said, do you think that's paid off like this year? No, like that's a decades-long investment. That's big. I mean, it's literally a big investment. It's a big building, a lot of money. Like that's a big, but they ran all the numbers, had tons of people, I'm sure, looking at the numbers, and did it because whatever, uncertainty of, the floor falling out and the government, obtaining that building, we have a reasonable reason to believe in this country that's not on the table.
Got it.
Right. But in other places it might be, but you need that long-term investment for that long-term economic growth. I mean, that's heavy commerce. That's heavy industry. I mean, that's big. You need that big investment. If people are not willing to ever look past like a year or two, right? Which given some of these developing areas, that's rational, to be honest with you. Probably.
No doubt.
I mean, that can be and is a real constraint to wealth.
What about for an application for that or an example, what about commercial real estate? Like you'd say you're a commercial real estate developer and, you've got your numbers and things look rosy in December of 19 and now you're halfway through projects and
it's a different world now for, at least to me, it seems,
Are we going to warehouse people anymore is the question. Things are coming back, but are we going to return to, that kind of like work environment where we warehouse people?
It's interesting. I mean, I think people, come March 2020, everyone stayed home. And I think by and large, if you took the litmus of businesses as a whole in March 2020 and be like, let's say we know we're home for the next 2 months. We have to be home for the next 2 months.
Okay.
How's business going to go for us? I think they would have been very pessimistic of it being able to be done and done well. Whatever it is you're doing, consulting, obviously selling things is a little different in an environment like that. But broadly speaking, office workers working from home instead of from an office, I think they would have said no. And I think it went pretty well. I think a lot of people were like, wow. Like, I think there's some places that found a little drop off in productivity. I think people, I think if you had to ask managers, I think the majority of them, maybe even the super majority of them would have to admit like that actually worked out pretty well. People did their work. They were at home. They did their thing. Mm-hmm. Work got done. And that was that. I mean, there's more to the story than that, but I don't know. I don't see, I mean, it's interesting. I don't think you're going to see the density of commercial kind of occupancy in real estate. I don't think you're going to see that. I hear all sorts of businesses looking to downsize, whether it's corporate headquarters, whether it's
right.
I mean, also they're looking to find smaller places. I think people seem married to the fact that there is some value in being face to face. Like there's some creativity there. Like we get something out of that.
Depends on the industry.
Of course. But there's some value to getting the group together. There's something to that. But in light of the record of how well it seemed to have gone, it was stressful for people, obviously. But I mean, if you think of it, I mean, it shouldn't be, I got 2 little ones at home. There's no way I'd be able to, do, it's tough, when you've
certainly.
But for people that don't, or for people with older kids that can kind of watch themselves,
And they kind of work as well too. It depends on the work.
Right. I think it went pretty well. And on the plus side, if, all else being equal, if you're not going into an office, you don't have a commute. So there's like probably an hour at least a day that you now have extra.
Certainly.
That even if it means you're not even working more, that's another hour that you get. That's got to make people happy.
Certainly.
Happy people are going to be more productive, if they're at home and they, maybe they work, maybe they have a little office space set up at their kitchen table. Maybe they even have a home office, right? Maybe they like working from their bed and they just don't need to be on whatever. It just, if they're more comfortable and they're getting more done, I don't think it's inconceivable to think of that. I don't think a lot of us would have said that in March of 2020, but in retrospect, it seems to make sense.
No. And the interesting thing is too, is if we encounter this again, the difference will be, I think, is we know we can get through it. We've now got that muscle. We know we've done it once. We know we can get through it. I mean, it's ugly and it's a pain in the ass. We can get through it.
Yeah, and given just the the lack of, it wasn't like we did have on the one hand, at least from a data standpoint, we did have some variation in policy response across states, some pretty considerable variation in policy response.
Yes.
That don't seem to have, at least by a landslide, led to better or worse outcomes. It just seems like the outcomes were kind of there. Maybe they got delayed a little bit here and there, but it didn't seem like there was a strong connection one way or the other. Obviously, that's going to be a topic of debate moving forward.
Sure,
at least at face value, it doesn't seem like that's the case.
Right.
To that end, insofar as people realize that, I'm not sure they're going to take it and shut down again. I'm not sure they're going to take that. I'm not sure they would. Just my guess.
No, I think you're onto something.
I mean, maybe health measures. I think people are willing to take health measures, but in terms of shutting the whole game down, I'm not. I mean, I don't know what would happen if, a state tried to do that again. I would like to think, as being Americans with individualism, they just, fuck it, we're going to do what we're doing.
Exactly.
They're going to have the restaurant. Come get me if you want to come get me. Come get all of us.
I think it's.
Too many people's livelihoods. Too many people's livelihoods.
A lot of people got hurt.
A lot of people got hurt. A lot of people that we cared about got hurt. And I think, another thing I remember reading about too, trying to process all the emotions of whatever you're going through, and the stress that you're going through. There was this really neat article about how it was like it was like the soft social net in your life. I can't remember the phrase they used, but it wasn't like the wife, and it wasn't the kids, and it wasn't the friends either, to be honest with you, the people that, your neighbors, it wasn't that. You saw the people who stayed outside or whatever you did.
Right.
And it was like, every day at Duquesne, they used to have a bar called the Red Ring. It's closed. They're putting a new one in. And there's basically like a standing invitation there every day at like 4:00 amongst a fair number of people. If you want to have a beer, like it's just, you don't need to text and ask. You're just kind of there. So like you show up, see your friends, and like, those are like kind of the soft people. And like the bartender that always worked there that we knew well, don't have her phone number, but like just know a lot about her and her life by virtue of that. It's
Absolutely.
like all of that was like band-aided off, and it's like those people are not the people that you've chosen to like craft your life with, but they're still part of your life.
Certainly.
And it matters. And I think, that's a big thing too. It's like you just, all of, what makes life enjoyable is the friends you have and the relationships that you have.
Absolutely.
And a lot of that just got just taken away. And that's painful. Like that is painful. That is painful. And it's painful for a lot of people.
And I don't think people will want to go willingly do that again.
I don't think so. Now, again, government rules with the force of the gun. So, I mean, that's still there at the end of the day, but I would like to believe, I don't have to think anything. I would like to believe that given the experiences of that, given that it didn't really achieve what people wanted it to achieve, given that it was kind of haphazard, it was just kind of seemed like,
no doubt,
by the seat of your pants, kind of figuring out what we're doing on the fly. Didn't seem like there was really any plan, dates being extended, all of that. I can't see people wanting to accept that as a policy solution moving forward.
It's a fascinating look when you step back and look at it all. It's fascinating to see that that tug between federal and state rights was on display.
Big time. Yeah, and I mean, it came down to the states, really, with that stuff when it came to COVID policy and what was to be done about it. But it was, I mean, there were some states. I was in Texas, but I wasn't in Texas until 2021, where just talking to people and friends of mine that live down there, they're like, it was a couple of weeks of weird in March, but then it was just back to normal ever since. Like just nothing, after that. And
I have a friend in Idaho, and they said for the most part it was kind of like that too.
Yeah, just there was a couple of weeks, and then everyone figured like onwards and upwards.
Yeah, it's just I definitely hope we don't go back to that again. I hope that we have that emotional muscle that it takes, because I don't think that you will get states to capitulate like that. Some states.
Yeah, I mean, again, that is, in theory, one of the features, not bugs, of federalism, is that you do have different policies, and yes, it's costly, but people can vote with their feet. And you do see a lot of people leaving a lot of larger cities and moving to areas that were a little more open. Maybe that's them expressing their preference of wanting to be in places that are a little more open. And maybe there's, it's you always see like net migration. So you get the sense that it's like, wow, only people leaving and no one going in. There could be people going in.
Certainly.
It's just on net, you're seeing a loss,
Yeah, they're going in. They're coming across the border and going in. There's probably some of that
I
going
mean,
on too.
San Francisco, I think, is the one that I saw some ranking. Like the out-migration was perhaps most severe out of San Francisco. Maybe it was. Maybe
I think
it wasn't.
California in general. Right?
But that, not to say no one moved to San Francisco in the last 2 years.
Of course, that's ridiculous.
So
No, 100%.
it is what it is.
100%. Yeah, I would think. I would think ultimately we've learned some lessons. I would certainly hope so.
I would hope so. Yeah, geez.
And I think it only happens about once every 100 years. So we don't go with
Yes,
another
I know.
pandemic for another 100 years.
For certain. Yes. Let's not do that.
Did you go a good time, pal?
Very much. Always fun to come here.
Yeah, but I can't let you go though without a sports related question.
Sports question. How the A's doing this year?
We want to talk about the DH. We know where we both stand on.
How the A's doing this year?
Oh, yeah. Do we have to talk about the A's? The A's and the Pirates, I put them in the same pot.
Yeah.
When you hear people bitch about like the latest, I think the latest football contract. It was the quarterback just signed for $400 million. There was a huge contract just signed. It was a quarterback.
Was it Watson in Cleveland?
There was one just recently. I think that usurped that. Was there a rookie that just signed? Was there a second-year player?
Well, I missed that if that's the
I
case.
thought I heard the number $400 million pulled up.
I do know Juan Soto was offered an extension for the Nationals at like 400
That's
something.
it.
Okay, so that was a 15-year extension, I think, for him. That would have paid
It's baseball.
$440, I think, is what it was.
440. So when you hear the novice fan just like bitch about the monopoly money that is, right? I mean, what's the intellectual argument for that?
For paying him that much money?
Yeah,
it's worth it.
Something simple.
I mean, it's worth it.
I mean, like,
it makes sense. It's worth it. He's a tremendously charismatic and popular player and productive player.
What he brings to the organization, they anticipate making more revenue off of his signing than they're going to pay him. It's a business transaction.
I know a new national TV contract is up to be renegotiated, so they're expecting salaries to bump up accordingly with regards to that. Believe it or not, that contract, if I remember correctly, and again, since it was never finalized, I don't think it was ever made public, so I think people are just kind of speculating to the nature of it, or maybe saying if you're going to have a contract like that, it's got to be like this. I think pretty heavily backloaded, so he'd be underpaid in the first years, which is a little weird because you kind of have to view it as a whole thing, not like if you had a 2-year guaranteed contract that paid you $1 this year and $25 million next year, would you not like that as compared to 12.5 for both years, given it's guaranteed, and it's all said and done? That always seemed a little weird to me.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it makes sense for the team, but
well, maybe with inflation, you'd want your money quicker. But nevertheless,
hyperinflation, you'd want it tomorrow.
What gets me about the Soto situation, and he turned it down, and maybe he's right for doing so. He's set to be a free agent after next year, I believe. And he wants to try the market. Maybe he should try the market, and he's certainly got that. It's his prerogative to do that. People are really coming back hard against the Nationals for, like, quote unquote, not signing him and saying, well, you're just going to trade your star now. And I'm like, I'd say dropping $440 million on someone is giving a goodwill, a good faith effort towards trying to keep this person on your team. I mean, could you make the argument that's underpaying him? Sure, I'm sure there's some metrics you can come up with saying that's underpaying him. That's still committing yourself to $440 million to one player who could break his leg tomorrow. And, I mean, that's a lot of money. And I do also know people are bitching at the owners. I think the owners are looking to sell the team. The Lerner family, I think, is looking to sell him. Right. And they didn't want to...
What's that value?
Oh, like of the whole franchise? It'd be over probably close to... I bet $1.5 billion would be my guess, I would say.
But they're going to pay one player.
But they're in Washington, is the thing. That's a
third of that worth of the team.
Right. Well, over. I mean, one's a stock, one's a flow.
But, right. But theoretically.
And they're saying, well, they don't want to take on the contract because it's going to make it hard to sell the team. So it's like they're arguing out of both sides of their mouth. They're always bitching when you've got these cheap owners. What do people bitch about nutting all the time? Sell the team, sell the team, you're cheap, sell the team. Well, they're trying to sell the team. You're complaining they're cheap. They're trying to sell the team. They're trying to do the thing that allows them to sell the team quicker.
If you don't win, the fans are never happy. It doesn't matter what you do. If you don't win.
I'm pretty agnostic when it comes to owners at the end of the day and try to kind of view it more from their lens of the decisions they make,
Sure.
and it's their business decisions because they're running a business. This one, I don't know. It's just they're just piling on the owners, and I'm like, I don't really know. What do you want from these people? Do you want them to offer a huge contract? They did. Do you want them to sell the team? Well, if they did, and they can't offer huge contracts, then they're gonna have a harder time selling the team.
The
Like,
fan-
what do you want from
The
them?
fan wants someone to buy the team and win, even if they lose money. That's what the fan wants. The fan doesn't care how much money they make; they want to win.
They do.
And the formula to do that in smaller markets is, the owner takes it on the chin financially. It's the only way, really, in theory, they have a shot to do it, unless you really get fortunate. I mean, just once in a while, a Tampa Bay season or an Oakland or a Kansas City season sprouts up there. Maybe.
I mean, you gotta thread the needle. You gotta try and get all the ducks in a row. Try and get your younger guys around at about the same time. Hit the free agent market effectively and strategic. Not like blow out the get the Francisco Liriano types.
Right.
Get the right little guy to
Right.
plug in there. He's not going to win the Cy Young, but he's a valuable
in
part.
13 and 14, right?
Right. And even in 15, I mean, they spent almost $100 million
That might have
on
been
that
the
team.
best team that didn't make it.
Probably might have been. I mean, they won the most games. But, that's a tough needle to thread, Any hiccups there?
Plus, who else is in your division?
Yes. Right.
A lot of factors involved.
Right. And I mean, it can be done. Tampa Bay shows it can be done, with the heavy spenders there. And they're a exemplary organization in terms of how to run stuff and who to pay for and when
Team
to
that no one
trade.
shows up to watch.
No. But, people have talked about that. And I've been down there. I didn't see the hockey and football stadiums, but I did see them, drove past the baseball stadium, and it's like way the hell out there.
It is.
The hockey team down there is supported ravenously.
Yes.
And so is the football team.
Well, they win.
The Rays win.
Yeah, they do.
But the argument is it's so much easier to get to those stadiums. If you stick the baseball stadium there, Tampa fans will come out to watch them play.
Probably.
I mean, it's not inconceivable.
Sounds logical.
It does. I mean, baseball's more games. It's a different sport, obviously. But they'd have to build a dome just because of the rain, down there.
It just seems so, like, when you say $400 million, and then I think back to 86 and the sporting news I opened up, oh my gosh, Ozzie Smith is going to make $1.5 million.
Yeah.
And George Brett's going to make $900,000. And in my mind, I'm like, man, that's a lot of money. Holy crap.
Yeah.
And now it's funny money,
I think, was it Nolan Ryan was the first to get $1 million? I think he was.
Him or Messerschmitt, wasn't it? I think they didn't I could have sworn that the Yankees signed Messerschmitt or Goose Gossage.
Okay.
And that was the first free agent.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
then Winfield came after that,
Gotcha.
and Messerschmitt. But yeah, it might have been Nolan Ryan was the first existing player on a team that was like kept on the team
maybe
by.
that was it. Yeah, that could be it.
But that's just, it's amazing to me.
Yeah.
I mean, where it's come.
I mean, that's
it's economics.
not a bad place to be in, to turn down a guaranteed $400 million contract. The contracts are becoming more unique too. There's a lot more creativity. Correa signed somewhat surprisingly with the Twins this last year, and he has a deal that's something like $30 million a year for 3 years, but he has an opt-out after every single year. So like the creativity of like, let's lock in maybe some bigger money earlier, some opt-outs later. So like if Soto, maybe is there an opt-out after, let's say he signs it and there's an opt-out after like 3 years. Maybe I can get some big money up front. If I'm still rocking and looking to get big, let's go back in the market and go big. And then the teams are trying to get it on their end too. So just the dynamics of it, I think is kind of fun.
It's a crapshoot because do you sign that long-term deal so you have guarantees in there, or do you know that with just the inflation of baseball and money, it's like $400 million will be $800 million 10 years from now or 5 years from now.
Yeah, and you have to view these contracts too as like they're all or none. Right? It's like either you sign the contract or you don't. It's not like you sign the pieces that you like, because from the player perspective, it's like, why would you ever go for a team option? Like if I'm kicking ass, I want to be a free agent. The only time they're going to exercise the options when I'm worth it, but you have to look at the whole thing.
Things can happen.
Well, yes, but you still, that team option, maybe the team tacked on that option in exchange for, more upfront that's guaranteed. It's just the dynamics of it.
Yeah.
The negotiation of it, I think, is always interesting. It's a shame you only get to see the finished product. I've got
once in a while you'll get a peek in it. You'll get unpacked once in a while.
I've got a former student of mine that worked on the Calcutta auction paper with me, actually, now that I think of it. And he's in law school at Duquesne, and he's gotten himself into like the sports law. He's gotten into that good.
Okay.
He had he'll probably correct me when I'm wrong here, but he had an internship with like the law firm or a law firm that was working on the Major League Baseball collective bargaining agreement.
Okay.
And all the particulars of that. So we got into that. And that's fantastic. I just love hearing about hearing about, I don't know if he's privy to negotiations on these things or how that works. I think that would be tremendous stories over beer just to hear about those particular,
And something
what
tells
did we
me
trade?
you'll get that story.
I hope so. Yeah. And I have another student that's, I think, out of law school, but I think he's interested in doing sports stuff too. So yeah, I hope so. It's always fun. Getting, peeling the onion back a little bit and kind of seeing what's going on behind the scenes. It's just
a lot.
It's great.
It's crazy money.
It is. It's a lot of money. And I mean, that's it. I mean, Major League Baseball even pales to the NFL when it comes to money.
That's flipped. Remember when it was in the 70s, 80s, and probably 90s, it was MLB where all the big contracts were.
Sure.
Remember, I want to say it was 87. I think there was a linebacker for the Giants who signed a free agent deal. He went from the Giants to the Skins. I think it was Wilbur Marshall or somebody like that.
There's a guy.
Yeah, and it was like don't laugh, I think it was like a $2 million contract.
Yeah.
87. It was like a big thing because they were making that kind of money. Baseball was dwarfing them.
Right. And the thing about baseball, too, is all that money's guaranteed. With football, it's like I do not know football contracts. I mean, it's like so-and-so signs this, $80 million contract for 4 years, and you got your signing bonus, and then they cut them the next year and don't have to pay. Like, it's just weird.
And it's weird how they say it. Yeah, and the maneuvers that teams have to do and what applies to the quote-unquote cap and all that. I mean, that's a job in and of itself to manage. Teams
hire
right?
several people to figure that stuff out.
No,
they do.
Right?
That I know
it's so complex.
It is.
Is it too complex?
I mean, it's too complex for the average fan. That's for certain.
But should the fans care about that stuff?
I mean,
is that part of the game?
I think the certain kind of fan that would select themselves into following the front office manipulations would probably be the kind of person willing to learn a lot about that.
True.
I would say that.
And I would think with fantasy,
I'm not a super huge NFL fan, so I just kind of chuckle at the contracts, and it's never really come up in sports econ because we offer a labor econ class at Duquesne as well, and they do kind of like sports examples in that class, so I don't really feel the need to get into that in my class.
Got it.
When they do their individual kind of topics, they get to choose topics over the course of the semester. Sometimes they go down labor market stuff and talk about it a little bit, but nothing too crazy.
All right, my friend. Until next time.
All righty.
I can't thank you enough.
This is fun. Can't wait.
Thank you, Doctor.
Have a good night. Take care.
See you soon, pal.
All right.
We're out.